electing. But the idea here isn't some massive election of all mankind, and some are chosen before they're ever born to be vessels of death and destruction and bound to go to hell. That's not what he's talking about. He's just talking here about Israel and how he chooses his lineage in Israel. And in that choosing, it comes from a place we can't get our mind around. He's going to tell us later, as the potter and us as the clay. We don't get to say to the potter, why did you make me this way? That's another hard one. So we're going to get to that. Okay, so going on. Not by works, but by him who calls. She was told, the older will serve the younger. Just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. And I know that word, I've told you before, if you go back and look, as far as our translations go, the best we can do is leave the word hated there. And then we'll just have to let that sit there. So when they were born, if you remember, Jacob's grabbing at his already a characteristic, right? Already a characteristic. They say that because it is a characteristic of him. He's grabbing at the heel of Esau, who is the firstborn son. Now, the idea, Sean, of firstborn is not, it may very well be derived from God, but it's not necessarily derived from the Bible.
That's what I was wondering.
Because the ancients, the Egyptians and others, firstborns way back, and I'm not sure how that happened. Maybe because you may not have another, so the firstborn male has to be the male, and you got to go ahead and make the promise to the firstborn male to give your inheritance and everything too. I don't know, but it doesn't necessarily come through God ever saying the firstborn will always be the one that should receive the inheritance. As a matter of fact, God actually kind of turns that on its head numerous times, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. Right here he does. It's the second born. It's Joseph who's the 11th born. Mm-hmm. It's Christ who is his firstborn in a sense. Mm-hmm. You see? So his only begotten son, though.
Well, that's why I was wondering. I know that you don't think it's fair, but that if it wasn't God who made that law, then to me anything goes.
Mm-hmm.
Which law?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the firstborn?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We don't practice it today, do
we? No.
And we're not commanded, that I know of, to practice it. Although the Jewish people practiced it.
The Mennonites do that too.
Do they?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it could be, if I look deeply, it may be even encrypted in Jewish law. I don't know. One thing I want to say to you guys with all this, and some people don't like it, but I think and you can disregard it if you don't like it, but I think it's very valuable in understanding a lot of what's going on. Abraham's not a blank slate. Abraham grew up where? Or where was he born? In the land of Canaan. Ur. He's from Ur, which is Mesopotamia. Listen, go back and study the history of Ur. You know, it's polytheistic, and there's a lot of there's child sacrifice, there's all kinds of stuff going on.
But we touched on that last week, and it had me thinking maybe that's why Abraham took his son up to sacrifice him, because he misunderstood. God went, "You're gonna give me your son," and he went, "Okay, here I go." And God went, "Oh Lord, no, that's not what I meant."
Okay,
but
oh my me.
Yeah, oh my me. Here's a ram.
And what you're saying is a way that that many now do translate and understand that it was a misunderstanding on his part. But I've rethought that, because I think Scripture, these are true characters and true people who really lived. I think that it might have been something even bigger than that. I think it might have been the end of child sacrifice. I was listening to Sam Harris. He's an atheist who, if you like good debate, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson are very interesting. Jordan is not a Christian under the concepts of what we understand Christianity, but he argues very well with Sam Harris concerning Scripture and everything else. But Harris accuses Christianity of being, a religion of child sacrifice. I think it's just the opposite. I think that my position is Isaac's not sacrificed, y'all. That doesn't happen. Child sacrifice doesn't happen here. As a matter of fact, it is stopped right here. There's nothing else in Scripture that I can find after this. Before this, nothing says anything per se that I know of, but it is a practice, it is a part, again, of that ancient world. It's happening in all different culture groups. And the idea of it is, what is the ultimate thing we can sacrifice? Well, the ultimate thing you could sacrifice of yourself would be yourself, to die. But then maybe worse, the ultimate thing to sacrifice would be your child. So if you are sacrificing to the gods, and let's say you're Egyptian, or you're from Ur, and you're Chaldean, I guess it would have been Chaldean, and you're making sacrifices to your God, and you are compelled to make the ultimate sacrifice to get the ultimate results from your God, and that would then be the sacrifice of your child. So child sacrifice is happening, and it not only did it develop in this ancient world here, but even stronger in a very disconnected ancient world in Central and South America. It happened, like big time there. The Mayan sacrificed lots and lots and lots of humans. So the idea of sacrificing of humans, I think, stops here. Never to happen again. Never told that that's a way of worship. Never told that that pleases God until we get right here. And here we have it on both sides. We have the father making the sacrifice of his child, and we have the child laying his own life down. The ultimate in what could be given. So I think understanding, okay, the Egyptians did it, they did it, the Chaldeans did it, this happened with the Samaritans, this happened all over. And here Abraham, this is a way of life, and it's a concept and an understanding. You ever wonder why he didn't really question that big time? Well, I don't think he questioned it because he understood it. Child sacrifices is something, well, I saw that happen when I was a kid, or I saw that because he also lived in Egypt, for a period of time. Saw it when I was in Egypt, I understand it. It means that you're giving the absolute best of what you have.
And that was the only one. And after
Sarah.
waiting
so long.
Yes. After being old.
Yeah. So that until Christ comes.
Yeah.
And it was all in his plan that he was going to do this. That he was going to make this sacrifice. God, the Father, was going to make this sacrifice. So, okay, so let's move on down. Pretty interesting stuff here as we kind of work through this. Dang, we're going to run out of time. Okay. So we know it was stated, and he chose that he was going to work through them. And then we left off last week in verse 14. So he says, in this choosing, in this saying that I worked through Jacob, verse 14, what shall we say? Is God unjust? It's exactly what you're saying. Exactly what I would say. And Paul knows everybody's going to say that at some level. But then he says, no. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. Okay? So this section is when Moses is in the cleft of the rock and God passes him. And this is when he says this. He doesn't say it in the context of destroying people. He says it in the context of, Moses, I have shown you incredible mercy. I'm going to let you see the glory of me pass by. We tend to put it in the context of him having done something bad. But there is something, and I struggle with this big time, there is something in the idea that God has the privilege and the right to make arbitrary, what I would think are arbitrary, but to him are not. decisions in what he does. And it's scary to me, in a way, but I don't believe he's inconsistent. And I'll tell you why I think it's scary. I had a man in my office who grew up in the Reformed theology, which believes that God chooses ahead of time. Doesn't matter what you do or think or say. You're going to go, you are a child or a vessel of destruction. You're going to go to hell. He came into my office, and after about 20 minutes of talking, the first time we talked, he said, I am going to go to hell. And I said, why? And he said, because God has not chosen me. And I said, well, I started talking about, well, what do you mean? Why has God not chosen me? And he described his life and the events and the things that happened in his life, and he was convinced that God had not chosen him. And I said, well, the mere fact that you're in here tells me that the Spirit's working in you. But he wouldn't accept that, because he said, well, God does that. God will let somebody think they're one of his children, but they're really not. And that happens all the time. In the church, they would say all the time. There's lots of people who think they're children of God, but they're really not. Well, that's scary to me. And scary to me to think that, okay, well, God could for a while take Brian, and Brian could have faith for a period of time, but then at God's own pleasure or decision, take that away from him. And in the end, Brian does not go to be with him. And in that case, I would say, I would have a problem. I'd be like, God, you're unjust, you're unfair, But I don't think that's what's happening here. And I know that there's a whole theology that's been built around this. It's very troubling to me. John Wesley called the doctrine of predestination a poison, a destructive poison within the church. So that's kind of the struggle there. But there's still an element, you guys, that we have to acknowledge, that he makes decisions we don't understand. Because that's God.
I just want to add where you read where he said compassion and mercy. Some translations say it this way, that he says in that passage, I am the creator of compassion and I am the creator of mercy. So I like that version, that translation, because it kind of does paint that where does compassion and mercy come from? From our creator. He's the one that is, we
It's
wouldn't
his
know.
character.
Yeah, we wouldn't know about it if it wasn't for him.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not like, he's just giving and taking and, I hate someone and I love some others. No, he is compassion, he is mercy, and he is giving that to us. And, we shouldn't have harsh judgments against the one that revealed compassion and mercy for us to understand to begin with.
Now, I did a bad thing here because I took us down one of those rabbit holes a little bit, and that's not what Paul's talking about here. He's talking about his choosing to work his lineage. That's what he's talking about.
That's the only
He's not talking about a
thing that I
massive, this is how the whole world. So in verse 16, I'm going to leave you with these to ponder and think about. So in verse 16 he says, it does not therefore depend on man's desire or effort, but on God's mercy. Okay? For the scripture says to Pharaoh, I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. And then he goes on, as he talked about the hardening, we know the story, they know the story, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. But again, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart is not necessarily saying that God does this with all people even, but there is something that happens with Pharaoh that God does to work out his purposes. And I've thought a lot about that because I've been rereading that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that he hardened his heart forever, or that he hardened his heart in such a way that Pharaoh had no other options. But he does say in this situation that he creates this situation with Pharaoh, and there's a whole lot there we can study. And he does have an effect in Pharaoh's thinking here. So pretty tough, but next week I want to share some more with you, because I thought a lot about what he does with Pharaoh and them, and we're totally out of time, and I wondered, why doesn't he just soften Pharaoh's heart and let the people go?
Yeah.
Because the result of him hardening Pharaoh's heart is they have to suffer more. Now they got to make brick, and they don't get straw. They got to go raise and collect their own straw. He makes
It's
them
a
suffer
journey.
more.
It's a journey, and they
He's
don't
tougher
learn
than
the
mine.
lesson if it's
He knows
just
they got 40
given.
years coming.
Is there completely against the way of the world, I would say in most cases, is there value in suffering?
Absolutely.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Absolutely.
You
And so
win-
next
you
we're
win
gonna
some,
talk
you
about it,
learn
because
some.
honestly, you guys,
Exactly. You are.
sometimes
Yes.
we don't see what's right in front of us.
Right, yeah.
But right now, I think we're suffering.
Oh, yeah.
There is suffering going on in this country. More suffering probably than most of us have seen in our lifetime. Some maybe, who've been here for the wars and stuff saw a lot of suffering, but there's suffering going on. And I don't know. There's things that are happening, I think, that are spiritual right now. And we just need to stay very close to the Lord. We're gonna pray.